push app out. I was talking to some of the higher ups in Substack, and I was telling them that you guys got to have like a green room to get like the first 100 people collected, and then we go, as
Oh,
opposed
smart.
to So I think they're working on that. They said
Oh, that's smart.
so. I'll ask you to like introduce yourself to everybody so they know who you are and all that good stuff too. Um, mm, mm, see. All right, great. We got a good group coming in. We are going to solve all the world's problems on this Substack Live, believe it or not. So,
Oh, I just thought we were gonna show off our fashion coordination. I thought all we
well,
did was
I
dress
think
the same, and that's all that was required.
I think that brilliance goes without saying. So, you know, we can't belabor the obvious here. Let's see here. All right, great. Let's dive in. Hey all, thanks for joining. I'm looking forward to this conversation with Anat because a lot's happening. Today's a 3-year anniversary of the repeal of Roe. The Dobbs decision, we'll talk about that. We are maybe in a ceasefire situation with Iran, maybe not. Who really knows? Depends on who you ask and depends on who's counting. And the Supreme Court continues to forget that due process of law is actually in the Constitution at least 3 times. But Anat, before we dive in, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our audience just so they understand why you're the rock star that you are.
Well, first of all, thank you for having this conversation with me. I'm just such a massive admirer of yours. So it's just a real honor to be in your company. My name is Anat, and I am a messaging and research consultant. I look into why certain messages resonate and others don't. My background is in cognition and linguistics, which is simply the study of how people reason and come to judgments. And so I do a lot of work trying to understand how people are understanding and which words, images, the order of our words, the frame, and times metaphors that we utilize advances their more progressive instincts and selves, and which ones go against that. And so I do a lot of analytic work and then big volumes of empirical testing, and then ideally design communication campaigns both within the US but frequently abroad on the basis of that knowledge.
Amazing. And so given that, have you figured out why people keep voting for a fascist despite him being the antithesis of everything that he claims to be?
Yeah, I guess what I would say about that, because we could talk about that for 17 hours,
Yeah.
is two things. The first is that what we saw throughout 2024 and what we see really strikingly in the data since the inauguration is that the central thing that differentiated the Harris voter from the not Harris voter,
Yeah.
by the not Harris voter, I'm mean a bucket that is, Trump, stay home, third party, which I realize are different impulses,
Yeah.
was not actually, as many in the centrist pundit class would have you believe, some sort of sudden hunger and attraction for a fascist agenda. Don't mistake me. There is that. There are people for whom that scratches a white supremacist itch. I'm not pretending that isn't part of America. But for the vast swath of those people, the differentiation between those two buckets was not an attraction to the Project 2025 agenda. It was, in fact, what I came to call the credibility chasm. So what that means is when we would ask folks, do you think this is going to happen? Do you think this is going to happen? Like, do you think they will actually act a national abortion ban? Do you believe that they will actually begin abduction of people off of our streets? You believe they will actually unleash the military and turn our government into a weapon against our own people? Do you believe that they will actually take retribution against their quote unquote political enemies? The difference between the Harris voter, whether that person was like in the K hive, sign me up, like I've got the t-shirt, or grudgingly, I guess this is what I'll do, was they said, yes, I think they will do it. And the people in the other bucket said, I don't think it's going to happen.
Mm.
And the reason that I raise that is because it's extraordinarily important to understand that what's going on right now in the United States is not so much, except among the Trump loyalists, who are a segment of our population. Don't mistake me. I'm not pretending that they're not. But among the majority of voter eligible people, and certainly people, it is not an attraction to fascism. It is quite simply a repudiation of the status quo.
Mm.
And what we know the world over, for those of us who have worked confronting authoritarianism anywhere, is that neoliberalism is the handmaiden to authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And when you screw people over, and not in the fun way, economically, time and time and time again, the siren song of the authoritarian, which is scapegoating, which is shame and blame some other, which is you think your life sucks because of those people, that has much more resonance and
Effective. Yeah.
potency.
Yeah. Uh, Brilliantly said. I mean, I think we often talk about the Democratic Party doesn't have a very effective message. Even now, we have no leader in the party. There's no discernible leader. You couldn't tell me what the party actually stands for right now, aside from Trump is bad. And he is, but that's not a winning message to say that I'm not the fascist. Because if it was a winning message, then the fascists wouldn't have an approval rating 20 points higher than you right now, which is the case. And Biden ran on saving the soul of America, on the democracy of America. And then he didn't prosecute Trump, and he let Garland not prosecute Trump. He didn't pass voting rights because of the Jim Crow filibuster. He didn't expand healthcare access. He didn't raise the living wage. He didn't protect Roe. There's so much to point at that he did well, which I respect. The CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bill, bring down the price of some drugs. I get all that. At the end of the day, a study came out that poverty rose by 60%, wealth and income inequality increased. And you're right, when you have a megalomaniac like Trump, with the platform he has, exploiting that. To me, one of the surveys post-election that was really significant to me was the one asking those folks who stayed home, why did you stay home? And the number one reason actually was Palestine. That folks, you talk about bucking the status quo. People said that was the top issue for me. 77% of Democrats, by the way, there's this desire to like scapegoat the far left part of the party or the Muslim American part of the party, but 77% of Democrats in polling over the summer of 2024 said stop arming Netanyahu. And obviously, the Biden-Harris campaign was attached to the hip. And we can speculate, and I think intelligently speculate that Harris would have been different if she was president. I don't think it's reasonable to doubt that, or make sense to doubt that. Um, but in the here and now, when people are asked, when this genocide is happening here and now, you see that. And I think where the Democratic Party, in my opinion, needs to make a decision is: are we going to actually be the working class party? Um, or are we going to have a No King's Day protest while denying a real primary and telling them who their nominee is? I mean, people see that hypocrisy, and it matters. And when you call it out, it's like, well, you're just tearing down the party. Well, no, I'm telling you, the data shows in 2008 we had an extraordinarily robust primary, and Obama won, even though he wasn't supposed to win. He won, and people got behind him, and we won the House and the Senate. In 2016, we did not have a very good primary at all. It was kind of, predetermined, and we saw how badly we lost. In 2020, there was a much more robust primary. Look at how well we did. In 24, there wasn't. And I think that's kind of where you're not going to have a leader unless you have a primary to kind of define a leader. And I think a lot of where we are now is a combination of Trump absolutely being a fascist and lying and cheating and stealing and doing everything he possibly can to attain power, and Democrats just not putting up a fight, still playing by a rule book when the house is on fire. And until we get a fight going in the Democrats, I think people are going to stay disengaged. They're not going to want to be part of a party that doesn't fight. Hakeem Jeffries, and I'll close with this thought. I'll get your thoughts on it. But Hakeem Jeffries was asked yesterday What are your thoughts on the bipartisan war powers resolution to ensure that Trump can't go to war without congressional approval? Now, this is a constitutional principle, and to have the war powers resolution is a very strong component. You got Thomas Massey as far right as you can get, Khanna as far left as you can get. Um, Tim Kaine, who's kind of a moderate, but he's in the Senate, he supports it. And Hakeem Jeffries' response was, I haven't had a chance to look at it. And I'm like, my dude, what are you waiting for? What do you need to have happen? So your thoughts on that? I mean, that was a lot of information, but just kind of, I'm ranting a little bit, but your thoughts on how we get the party leadership to actually listen to the base of the party, which is Black women, and then broadly people of color and working class people in general.
Yeah. So I will say two things. The first, an affirmation of the first part of what you said. You know, I'm a words lady, and like I can get into very specific wording choices if you want, because as I like to tell my clients, you pay tell you that words mean things. And there are really specific nuances of language. I'll just throw out one by way of illustration. The shift away from calling what's going on deportations, which is inaccurate because deportation has embedded within it the assumption of due process,
Yeah.
to abduction and now kidnappings. That has made a significant difference. We can see that when people are asked about deportations, they reason differently than about abductions. And that change in language has mattered. I can give you lots of other. It's a war on a war on Iran, not a war with Iran, with tiny prepositional difference implies a mutuality. Like I can do language like magic tricks
Yeah.
for you. But to what you said, you have kids, I have kids. Anyone with kids knows that there is nothing that you can say that is as loud as what you do.
Yes,
There is
exactly.
no wording. I don't care how magical it is,
Yeah.
that is as loud as what you do. And so what we saw through 2024, so we're in focus. At this point, we've done around 260 focus groups since the outset of 2021 with disaffected Democrats and swing. That's who we look at. We look at people who left for the couch and people who left for the right. That's who we're talking to. And the number one through line, like the battle cry of these voters was, and I quote, this all happens on Democrats' watch. And it sounds like this. Well, I don't know, but it seems to me like Roe v. Wade fell when Democrats were in charge. Well, I don't know, but it seems to me like all of this, violent white nationalism, this voter suppression, not that they would use this language, happened while Democrats were in charge. And the higher information ones, who are rarer, would say, for years you had all three houses. Why didn't you codify Roe? Why didn't you pass the Freedom to Vote Act? And I think in one group, and this is such a poetic metaphor, but I'm going to use an anecdote to illustrate because it really is emblematic of the general sentiment. We asked people, this was before Biden dropped out, so this was in June, if you think about these two outcomes, Republicans winning or Democrats winning, as two different paths, two different futures, because we found a lot more utility out of talking about two different futures and two different parties. We also found a lot more utility about talking about Trump will do versus Trump is. Anytime we would say Trump is and get into character arguments, people would say, yeah, well, Biden is. But if we would say Trump will do, we had surer footing to get toward that negative agenda. Anyway, I digress. One African-American man said, it's like this. It's like there are two paths and you're in a car and the brakes give out. And you're in a car, and on the one hand, you are accelerating with all the gas possible into the abyss that's at the bottom of the hill. But on the other path, basically the brakes just give out. So either way, you're going to go into the abyss. One's just faster than the other, which was his sort of analogy for these futures. Anyway, I'm just reaffirming other what you said. If we do not behave
Yeah.
as if we were inside of existential peril, if we do not behave like this is not frogs, that the frogs in the boiling water are not in a jacuzzi, right? Not a jacuzzi, friends.
Yep.
Then it becomes impossible to believe us when we say that's the case. If the way that you behave is not commensurate to the way that you are speaking,
Exactly.
one a lie.
Yep.
But as far as the end of what you asked, and I'm going to interrupt myself to say, have you any feedback from me?
It's a little bit, but it's fine. I mean, I think
Okay.
if you're a little bit choppy, but I can hear you fine.
I have no idea why. Apologies to everyone. That's never happened to me before. It must be some sort of, fascist
Yeah. Let's
bias.
chalk it up to that.
Yeah, let's chalk it up. As far as your last question, what will it take to get Democrats, blah, 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 blah. I try to remind myself on a daily basis that successful movements to confront authoritarianism have never actually come from the opposition party.
Mm.
Try to imagine for a moment, if you will, in the midst or at the outset, I should say, of the Montgomery bus boycott, if the folks who did all of that ordinary mutual aid and all of that really, really, really challenging work of establishing parks, getting bicycles, finding alternative modes of transportation with very little resources, if they had instead said to themselves, this whole segregation thing, we should call up a Democrat, or we should send a telegram to a Democrat, or we should be like, hey, yo, would you get on this?
Yeah.
Now, of course, to be clear, at the end of the day, the Civil Rights Act required Democratic action. And by that, I mean, big D Democrat. But it didn't start there. The same in the midst of the outset of the HIV/AIDS crisis, the folks at ACT UP had been like, we should get on the phone with the FDA. I bet if we just call the FDA and say, yo, could we please have some, antiretrovirals? Or if we were to call Democrats and say, the FDA is holding this up, people are dying.
Yeah.
Please. No, what did they do? They broke into the New York Stock Exchange. They hung a banner that said, "Sell Burroughs Welcome," which is the pharmaceutical that, making AZT. And then they did a die-in after they got arrested. The point of these examples is that, with exceptions, and this is where hashtag not all Democrats does apply, there are exceptions. And to be fair, I want to acknowledge that. But Democrats aren't going to lead. Why would they lead? Why would Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer, who have made it this far in their own and succeeded by their own desired method, they have achieved the thing that they wanted for themselves, pursuing the path that they have to date. Why would they suddenly take the guidance of some wacky lady in California? I'm going to talk about myself. I'm not going to impugn you. And so instead, what we have to recognize is what's occurring before our very eyes. With exceptions, and there are exceptions, right? People exception, those an exception. Folks who are calling out and saying, let's have a roll call vote. Let's get on the record about it. What happened is what you saw happen in my very own state, right? Gavin has been among the worst. His response to the siren song of the right authoritarian, which to foment a counter revolution that never happened, to shame and blame immigrants, to blame trans people, to carry that narrative that they're the reason for our law, just an extension of the right-wing narrative that fixed the problem.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Yeah.
Doing this podcast bullshit. Sorry, I didn't ask if I could swear.
You can swear, don't worry.
And then what happened? LA happened. The people of Los Angeles, city of angels, the angels in our midst, they stood up and they showed, not told, that all of the nonsense that people will only turn out in their own personal that we need to supply sanguine and adults in the room sounding conversations about violations of the rule of law and constitutional process, which sound like a fucking hall monitor. Yeah. And I don't know if you were in high school, people don't like the hall monitor.
No.
That's not right. But instead, we're like, fuck these thugs.
Yeah.
This city of immigrants, and we're going to stand up for our neighbors.
Yeah.
And that is when Governor Newsom actually started, speaking more, saying or being more forthright. And so what always happens is that movements precede elected leaders. And even though our leaders, because the very definition of the word leader is go first, ought to be going first, I think it's unrealistic to have that expectation of the
Yeah,
leader, most of
that's
them.
it's a really good nuance, Anat. That's a really, really important point. I mean, you can think of examples throughout history. Captain Robert Smalls, an enslaved black man, fled the Confederate South, stole a Confederate vessel, took it to Union waters, and then had to convince Lincoln to allow black Americans to fight in the Civil War. It wasn't Lincoln's own idea. He was against it. You had to have Captain Robert Smalls convince him that this has to happen. It was a man of the people that made it happen. And I think right now we're seeing examples of what I think a good leader looks like. I think we're seeing Zoran Mamdani in New York, and I was speaking with one of his campaign managers a couple days ago. That how did you guys go from 1% polling in New York City to the latest polls have him up 52-48, and she said that after the election last year, after Trump got elected back to the White House, we looked at the data in New York City of where there was the most rightward shift of voters. And we went to those neighborhoods and just talked to them, just asked them what was going on. And didn't offer any solutions, didn't tell them how we can fix it, just said, just help us understand what Democrats got wrong. That was it. And then use that to build his platform of free childcare, freezing rent, free transportation, a public health board, increasing awareness for anti-Semitism. And it's been working. It's effective because he led by saying, let me understand what the people want, as opposed to let me tell them what they want. I'll never forget, I think that the two moments where I was basically sure we were going to lose the election last year. One was when the initial enthusiasm was like at its high, and VP Harris went on The View, and she was asked, you probably remember this, what would you do different than Joe Biden? And I'm like, this is her chance to drive home that it's a new era, it's a new leadership. This is and give two or three key points. And she goes, I can't think of a single thing I would do differently. Well, okay, you're black, Asian, and female. And if all you can do is stick to the rich white guy and say you're not going to do anything differently, then you're giving up the representation that you bring. And it reminds me of an activist, a black civil rights activist in Akron, Ohio. His name escapes me, but he said to me, he goes, "Representation is not a destination. We got to go past that." And so when she said that, because I was canvassing, I was knocking doors, I could see the enthusiasm drop because it was like, well, Biden left. We didn't want him because we didn't want this old white guy who promised to run for one term and then maybe not and maybe so and whatnot. We're not totally happy. But if his replacement's going to do the exact same thing, well, then what's the point? And so that, I think, that was one thing that hurt the enthusiasm. And then two, when I saw the messaging shift, when the messaging went from these guys are weird and we got to stop with this weirdness, let people mind their own damn business. Like that was an effective message, right? Because it wasn't about demonizing. It was like, look, that's this weird behavior. You do what you got to do, but we're gonna, you don't want an abortion, don't get one, but don't bother other people. And it shifted to just how evil Trump is. And I remember there's one particular post about all the billionaires that have donated to Trump. And look, this billionaire elitist, he's funded by billionaires. And some random person responded with a list of the billionaires who have donated to Harris, and more billionaires had donated to Harris than had donated to Trump. And it's like, if your whole message is he's evil because he's funded by billionaires, but then you're funded by even more billionaires, the best argument against you now is coming from you. And so when I saw those two things happen, that one, we are not demonstrating how Harris is going to paint a new vision, and two, our messaging is less about how great her and Tim Walz is. And I love Tim Walz. I think he's fantastic. Our message shifting from that to just how evil Trump is. I'm like, we don't have a ship to sail anymore. We're done, and we're dead in the water. And unfortunately, that's what the end result was. And so what I'm hopeful for, especially in midterms, I happen to be a big fan of what David Hogg is doing, of primarying these corporate Democrats and getting them the heck out of Dodge because, you know, we're not going to solve a problem by continuing to elect the people that got us here in the first place. And when there's folks who are committed, I think as David Hogg is, to saying we need action, we need younger folks, we need people who are more committed, who are willing to take these bold, decisions. We need that. And short of that, I don't see how we stave off fascism.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say about that, so I've worked in Minnesota politics since 2017, including on Tim's first run for governor in 2018, and on what they called the Minnesota Miracle, the with the one vote majority, the of, if I'm getting my numbers right, 21, 22 pieces of progressive legislation in a month of obtaining that one vote majority, which leaves, I have to say, my blue state trifecta, California and New York has a blue trifecta. You know, we should be embarrassed, but
Yeah,
definitely should be ashamed.
that's your point.
And what I want to say about Minnesota, besides just what an extraordinary human being and public servant Melissa Hortman was, um, uh, is that Minnesota is a fascinating microcosm of actually deal with right-wing race baiting and scapegoating. Because you have in Minnesota a predominantly white state. I don't think I'm giving you a shocker. I think, look, you, you can Google the demographics. You can check me on that. With a fairly long-standing Somali American population. And concentrated within that population is what I like to call the ducking of hate. Because it is, you can do anti-Blackness against that population, you can do anti-Muslim, and you can do anti-immigrant, all wrapped in one. So it's got like all the flavors that the right wing want concentrated in one pack. And in 2018, they ran unreelected at the state level this discourse of Somali daycare fraud, suitcases full of cash sent to Mogadishu. Because, if you want to look, has all of the money in society, definitely look at daycare workers. They are rolling in it. That is who,
As as one does,
yeah,
yes,
workers are where it's at. So basically, instead of shrinking and being like, we just won't talk about race, we just won't talk about immigration. What I like to call the we don't talk about Bruno strategy that center left parties caving to, or even worse, we'll just offer an authoritarian light version. We will
yeah,
say, we'll also be tough on the border. We'll also be shitty to XYZ people, which never works. And the data show that it never works. They actually figured out how to confront it. And, I'm biased. I was part of this, but we came to create a thing called the Race Collective. Shout out to Ian Haney Lopez, who was part of the original work. He wrote Dog Whistle Politics. And there's a formula for confronting it. And Tim Walz calling them weird, but also his ability to sort of clap back. I would name Andy Bashir as another person,
yeah,
like, standard white guy. But when he gets stuff coming at him, he isn't silent about it. He doesn't ignore it. He doesn't try to change the topic to colorblind economic populism. He has an answer. And that answer is something to the effect of, you know what? No matter what we look like or where we come from, most of us would put heaven and earth for our family. You make a big we, and then you name the villain.
yeah,
For the villain, you say, but today, the MAGA Republicans want us to point our finger at newcomers because they know that if they can get us at each other's throats,
yeah,
we won't join together while they pick our pockets.
exactly right.
You narrate the dog whistle. You say to people, hey, this is the trick. You need to point the finger at the bad of the brown
Mm-hmm.
black guy. And Walz is adept at that because Minnesota is where we first really implemented the race plus narrative a ton and keep doing it cycle after cycle. And that's what works.
Yeah,
In the fight that you're in, you're not in a fight against inflation, you're in a fight against fascism. And
that's right.
we stop making believe. I know that I'm preaching to the choir here.
No, you're saying it brilliantly though, and I love this. And by the way, I'll just quick caveat. I hope Tim is laying the groundwork for a 2028 run. I really do because I think he would be brilliant in this space. And just to give illustrate for our listeners in these final couple of minutes, an example of what you're saying is on immigration. We've completely lost the plot on immigration.
Completely.
Completely lost the plot. And to me, the most infuriating thing, the number one response I get from MAGAs who are supporting Trump's fascism and kidnappings and just disappearing of people is, well, if Biden didn't have open borders, we wouldn't be in this mess. Not, completely ignoring the fact that Biden deported more people than Trump did. Completely ignoring the fact that he was as harsh on the deportation and on the restriction of asylum as Trump was. Just there's a reason why even Obama was called a deporter in chief. And imagine for a moment, and there's a really kind of, dare I say, inspiring. I rarely say this about Ronald Reagan. Moment between a debate of him and George Bush on immigration in the 1980 presidential debate. And Bush and Reagan are falling over each other to express more compassion for immigrants. And Reagan goes as far as to say that it is in our economic interests to allow immigrants to come, and we should have an open border policy with Mexico for economic vitality. I mean, this is a man who calls for an open border policy with Mexico. Could you
This
imagine?
is the man who, as governor, made a policy and had the audacity to name it in Spanish. The Brase
Woke liberal. This guy's a woke liberal, if you ask me.
guys like introducing Spanish into a vocabulary. Will the horrors never?
We speak American over here. We only speak American. Okay?
I hope the sarcasm is coming through. Otherwise, people are going to flip it. I'm going to be in so much trouble. Yeah, and today, my friend and colleague, who you may know, Waleed Shah, is also a prominent voice here. He recommended, why don't Democrats introduce an expanded roadmap to citizenship and call it the Ronald Reagan? Get people on the record. Are you yay or nay on the Ronald Reagan Act? Similarly, but in a different vein, why are Democratic senators not introducing the Melissa Hortman assault weapons ban?
Thank you.
You can't just be in opposition. You have to be in proposition.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm not an idiot. I know those things aren't going to pass. I know how math works. But the point is that you have to actually give people the hunger for a different agenda.
Gotta show up.
You have to show, not tell, that you would actually legislate in that. Otherwise, all you are is an opposition. But at the very least, if you're going to be an opposition, then you need to not just be paying lip service to it. You need to be acting accordingly.
Thank you.
Not, finger wagging against them one day and the next day voting for their crypto bill. Like, what is that?
I know. I mean, people have called it out before me, but Cory Booker, 25 hours on the Senate floor about compassion and empathy and humanity and values. And then the next day votes to send more money to Netanyahu to bomb Palestinians suffering a genocide. Like, people see that. And you can't just pretend that we're so compartmentalized that we are going to be, inspired by a shiny object and then ignore a genocide that's happening with our tax dollars. So I mean, it's refreshing to me, not to see thought leaders like you here, loud, proud, adamant, unapologetic. Trying to think of what other words I can say to describe just like the joy I feel when I see leaders like you speak truth to power. How can folks listening follow you, subscribe to you, support you, get in touch with you?
Oh, thank you. Well, so first of all, I have a podcast that's called Words to Win By, which is also my Substack. I'm pretty bad at being regular on Substack, but that podcast is it's a narrative podcast, so it's not just me talking with one person. Every episode is a campaign we won somewhere in the world and how we won it. So the very first show was about Jacinda becoming Prime Minister of New Zealand when she initially did work a lot abroad, as I said. Another about the Minnesota Greater Than Fear campaign. Listen to how, in order to reframe, one of the first steps that Muslim leaders in the state took was to host an Eid is for everyone celebration of Eid al-Fitr in their temple, by which Viking State, that is the temple of Minnesota, Viking State. And they had 20,000 people in there eating corn dogs, cotton candy, doing pony rides, and basically saying they're trying to sell you a story that Muslims are scary. Why don't you come hang out with us? Why don't you come look at it? Because once you come look at it, yeah, like it's scary from the dental work. Cotton candy is probably really good. And there were all sorts of ramifications of how much crap people were eating in that setting. But other
Yeah,
than that, like other than some funnel cake and other things that you probably shouldn't eat daily, that's kind of going on. So each episode is a campaign we won somewhere in the world, and it is intended to be proof that progressive ideas not only can win, but they do.
I love
And
it.
we run on our values, not from our values. And then the other thing I would offer is that all of the research that we do, we write open source, open IP contracts with all of our clients that if we do research how to talk about climate or how to talk about trans folks or talk about immigrants, it's on our website. All those method guides are there, locked in Spanish. Yeah, that's what I would
That's
offer.
great.
Yes.
Words to win by. That's the podcast is words to win by.
Yes.
I
And the
love it.
website is asocommunications.com.
ASO Communications, which are initials, Anat Shankar Osorio. Anat, a privilege. Let's do this again soon. And thank you for fighting a good fight. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Take care.